Hey everyone! Today we're going to bridge a gap of about 800 years and millions of miles to talk about something that connects deep space travel with a tiny, sealed room from the Middle Ages. We're diving into the science of isolation and what it really takes to survive it.
So let me start with a question for you. Picture it. We're finally sending a crew to Mars. What do you think is the single biggest threat they're going to face out there? Is it the radiation? A catastrophic mechanical failure? Maybe a meteor? Well, as it turns out, the answer, based on tons and tons of research, is something much, much closer to home. It's the astronaut's own mind. The psychological grind of being trapped in a tiny can for years, millions of miles from everything you've ever known, that's one of the biggest challenges we actually have to solve. And that brings us to what you could call the deep space dilemma. I mean, how on earth do you prepare someone for an environment that you just can't replicate? Well, you find the next best thing, right here on our own planet.
Yep, that's right. To get people ready for the crushing isolation of outer space, agencies like NASA and the ESA are sending astronauts deep underground. They use these places called terrestrial space analogs, which are basically spots on Earth that do a really good job of mimicking the extreme conditions of a long space flight.
And you know, one of the most effective of these space analogs is also one of the oldest places imaginable, a cave. Now, I know it sounds a little strange, but it turns out that a deep cave is a nearly perfect laboratory for studying what happens to humans during long-term isolation.
And the simulation is it's incredibly good. You've got total, absolute darkness, just like the void of space. You're confined, movement is tricky, and, this is the big one, you are completely, utterly cut off from all time cues. There's no sunrise, no sunset. Absolutely nothing to tell your body when it's time to wake up or time to go to sleep.
This total isolation brings out a really strange quirk in our biology. You see, without the sun to anchor us, our internal clock, our circadian rhythm, it just starts to drift. And study after study shows that our natural day isn't really 24 hours at all. It's actually closer to 25. So people living in caves for a long time, they naturally start living on a 25-hour cycle, completely out of sync with the entire world above them.
So, of course, scientists are studying these effects like crazy. And as you can see here, how long you're down there really matters. A short-term trip causes immediate physical stress. You know, your heart rate spikes. But if you stay for a while, these deeper, weirder changes start to happen. The body's rhythms just go haywire, and even things like reaction times start to slow down. It's all about figuring out how the human machine starts to break down when you disconnect it from the very planet it evolved on.
But all this modern science makes you wonder, right? Astronauts and scientists are kind of new to this game. So who were the original experts in this? Who are the pros at self-isolation? I mean, who willingly chose to live in a single, tiny space for their entire life?
Well, for the answer, we have to travel back in time, back to medieval England, to a group of incredibly devout people, mostly women, who were, without a doubt, the world's first masters of confinement.
They were called anchorites. The name comes from a Greek word that means to withdraw. And they took that seriously. An anchorite would be literally, physically sealed into a small stone cell that was attached to the side of a church. And this wasn't some short-term mission. This was a lifelong commitment. They went in, and they never came out.
The comparison between them and an astronaut is just fascinating. The astronaut's purpose is scientific exploration. The anchorite's was religious devotion. An astronaut is gone for a few years, maybe. The anchorite was gone for life. One has mission control on the radio, the other had the prayers of their village. But for all their differences, they both face the exact same enemy, the crushing, psychological weight of being totally alone and confined.
And the anchorites, they even had a special name for this enemy. It was a mental and spiritual crisis that was so common, it was basically considered their #1 occupational hazard. They called it acedia. Acedia was this state of just listlessness, a kind of spiritual exhaustion, where the anchorite would start to feel a deep, profound disgust for their own cell. It was the feeling of being completely and utterly trapped, not just by the stone walls, but by your own mind. In fact, the guidebooks written for anchorites were filled with warnings like this one: idleness breeds disgust for the cell. They understood this incredible truth, that a mind with nothing to do will literally turn on itself. So to fight it, they developed this mental toolkit, right? It was built around a super strict, non-negotiable routine of prayer and work. It wasn't just about staying busy, it was a survival strategy. It was a way to impose structure on a timeless void, and to focus the mind outward on a higher purpose instead of inward on their own suffering.
I mean, just look at the symptoms of this medieval problem. Listlessness, physical exhaustion, despair, restlessness, a hatred of your surroundings. Does any of that sound familiar? Because it maps almost perfectly onto the psychological distress that modern scientists see in people in isolation today. So whether you call it acedia or sensory deprivation, it seems like the human response to being trapped is truly timeless.
So what can this 800-year-old wisdom actually teach us about sending people to Mars? Well, a lot, actually. It really all comes down to your perspective.
And here's the big takeaway. Both the medieval anchorite and the modern scientist looked at their tiny confined space as a tool. For the anchorite, that stone cell was a crucible, a way to purify the soul through suffering. For the scientist, the cave is a lab, a way to collect data to help astronauts overcome that exact same suffering. The goals couldn't be more different. One embraces the struggle, the other tries to engineer it away. But the fundamental challenge is exactly the same.
And that really leaves us with one last question. And it applies whether you're on a mission to Mars, in a medieval cell, or, even just stuck in a room by yourself. When you're confined, is that space a prison that traps you, or is it a tool that can transform you? The answer to that? That might just be the key to surviving anywhere.